Hello everyone, welcome to NGIB preparation. In today's video, I'm going to walk you through one of the TOK essay 2020 prompts, as well as look into the structure of a general TOK essay so that you can get top marks for the essay. I'm going to be walking you through the TOK essay prompt. Accepting knowledge claims always involves an element of trust. Discuss this claim with reference to two areas of knowledge, where the first thing you want to do in your essay, and even when you're planning your essay, is to think about the meanings of the actual words. So define knowledge, usually as justified true belief according to Plato's definition, and trust you want to link to the way of knowing of faith, because faith in the TOK rubric is defined as a way of knowing, believing in something for which there is no proof. And if we think of trust in this way, then it becomes clear that these two things are interchangeable. It does say that you have to speak about specifically two areas of knowledge. Now, the areas of knowledge that I'm going to be talking about are the human sciences and mathematics, but of course you can also choose the natural sciences, history, religious knowledge systems, or indigenous knowledge systems. Regardless of what essay prompt you choose, you do have to talk about two areas of knowledge. Now, in your introduction, when you're writing your essay, you want to make clear that you understand the prompt. So my suggestion is for you to actually rephrase the prompt in your own words. So the way that I've done it here is that I've said that the prompt asks you to evaluate how much your shared knowledge depends on trust and faith. How much do we accept based on assumptions? You'll notice that I'm constantly using the terms knowledge, shared knowledge, personal knowledge, and the ways of knowing. You have to be familiar with the ways of knowing, and I'll put a diagram of what they are here. You have to use these terms because these are the things that differentiate this essay as a TOK essay. Also, I suggest that you look at the TOK textbook. I'll leave a link below because it explains what each of these areas of knowledge, ways of knowing are, and it's important that you're familiar with them when talking about it in your essay. You should be including at least two of these ways of knowing in your essay. The TOK essay structure is always the same. You start with an introduction where you explain what the terms mean. So we've already gone through this. You explain what the prompt means to you, and you might insert a quote. So you might start your essay with like a hook, a quote from an important thinker related to this idea of truth and faith. Then you want to relate it to your chosen areas of knowledge. So if I'm talking about mathematics and human sciences, I might say, for instance, in the field of psychology, it's important to have faith in the patients that they're being honest with you. But the most important part of the introduction is that you present a central knowledge question. The central knowledge question is basically just rephrasing the prompt into a related question, which you will be answering throughout your essay. So the central knowledge question related to this particular prompt could be, to what extent is the production of knowledge dependent on faith? So then your body paragraphs are structured into the areas of knowledge. Your first two paragraphs should be specifically about the human sciences and the response in the human sciences to the central knowledge question, and then your last two paragraphs before the conclusion should be about the second area of knowledge that you've chosen, in this case math. The point of each paragraph should be a response to the central knowledge question. So for instance, this one, paragraph 1 is knowledge claim 1, paragraph 2 is knowledge counterclaim 1, paragraph 3 is knowledge claim 2, paragraph 4 is knowledge counterclaim 2. To clarify what I mean by a knowledge claim, so the knowledge claim is a response to the central knowledge question in the affirmative. So for instance, yes, in psychology we do need faith because psychological knowledge is dependent on the patient's own testimony. But then the knowledge counterclaim would be the opposite. No, faith is not required for the production of knowledge in psychology because we could use empirical approaches like surveys. You'll also note that I'm speaking about psychology even though I said my human sciences was the area of knowledge. This is because the human sciences is an umbrella term. You have to talk about a specific branch of the human sciences like economics, psychology, or sociology, for instance. And this should be the one that you talk about in the whole of your essay. So then let's say I choose economics. What could be a potential knowledge claim in response to my central knowledge question? One could be, in economics, assumptions such as ceteris paribus, all things remaining equal, are necessary in the production of knowledge, therefore making economic knowledge necessarily dependent on faith, because we assume things that we cannot necessarily know for certain. You would then explain why assumptions like this are necessary. If we didn't have simplified models of reality in economics, even if they cannot be proven, if we didn't have them, we wouldn't be able to make predictions. And this is the nature of knowledge in economics. We want to predict human behavior. So the key ways of knowing that I'm using for this paragraph is faith and reason. Faith in the assumptions and also reason in interpreting and predicting. If I chose psychology, on the other hand, my knowledge claim 1 could be, psychologists must accept verbal testimony from their patients because they cannot really verify if what the patients are saying are true or not, so they need faith. I've already gone through this. Before this paragraph, you would explain why it is important that psychologists trust patients, because if psychologists just ignored everything that their patients said, then they would basically be excluding the patient from the own process of diagnosis. They would be excluding the patient's personal knowledge about their own condition. If you choose psychology, I suggest you look into the Verstehen or insight approaches, which are approaches that aim to include the patient in the diagnosis. This can also be called a humanistic approach, which just assumes that there is more to human behavior than just the behavior itself. There are motives behind it. If I stick with the psychology example, then the counterclaim would then be that no, psychology does not necessarily need to rely on faith because we have empirical psychology or behavioral psychology, which excludes the patient, and then it's simply more sense perception and reason rather than interpretation or faith. For the counterclaim, and then the second paragraph for the human sciences, I suggest you look at the behaviorism approach, which basically just assumes that people are nothing more than their behavior and their conditioning, and therefore there is no point in trusting in the patient's testimony or even bothering to understand what the patient thinks. And with every paragraph, you should probably end with an implication sentence. The implication sentence is basically you explaining why you think this is important. My second tip is to integrate at least 2 secondary knowledge questions within your essay. 2 is a good number to aim for, but basically what secondary knowledge questions are is they're smaller type of central knowledge questions, basically. So an example would be, how can psychologists use reason to avoid subjectivity in psychology? So it's a minor question that is still linked to your central knowledge question, but basically just helps you develop your argument. Something else I want to bring up is that students often think that the essay is as based on real life situations as the presentation. This is not true. Your essay is mostly your arguments, you talking about ways of knowing and knowledge, and then you can include some minor examples to bring forth your argument. Okay, so I've basically gone over my first 2 paragraphs about psychology, but what about my mathematics as an area of knowledge? So for paragraph 3, I would base it again on a knowledge claim. In other words, a response yes to the central knowledge question for mathematics. This could be, for instance, because mathematics relies on axioms, which are unproven assumptions like 2 + 2 = 4, it requires faith, and all mathematics is basically derivative of these basic assumptions. And then for my last body paragraph, it would be a counterclaim. So a response no to the central knowledge question for mathematics. So my response would be, mathematical proofs are not theories that can be changed, they are truth. Therefore, accepting a mathematical proof does not require faith, because ultimately mathematics is a language. And by showing your mathematical proof, assuming that everything works out fine, then it is very easy to accept a knowledge claim in mathematics without necessarily relying on faith. I also want to note that your claims and counterclaims should be the first sentence in each paragraph. You should not start by elaborating on something else. Your topic sentences should be the claims and counterclaims for each paragraph. Something else that I really suggest is taking a look at the knowledge framework. I'll also leave a link to that below, but basically the knowledge framework explains what the purpose of knowledge is in each area of knowledge and how areas of knowledge differ from each other. And this is important because you should compare and contrast the 2 areas of knowledge that you choose. For instance, if I do psychology and mathematics, I want to compare that in psychology the goal is to explain and understand human behavior, where in mathematics it might be just to quantify natural phenomena and how this affects the nature of knowledge. The last thing I want to say is that you should clearly finish with a clear conclusion. You should not be on the fence about what you were talking about. In your conclusion, you should summarize briefly everything that you've talked about, and then you should finish with, for example, it is therefore clear that in psychology faith is necessary in the production of knowledge, or it is clear that in psychology faith is not necessary in the production of knowledge. You should clearly answer the prompt and say whether it is true or false. And you should also finish kind of with a sentence explaining why this is important and how is this applicable to everyday life, to the greater world. Okay, thank you so much for watching, and if you have any questions, please leave them below and tell me what you would like to see next on our channel.